Greetings to the studio. I'm Harry Fricker. Welcome, folks. I'm so glad you're here. For this evening, you've got me. I'm on my own. So I'll be making a short presentation, giving some background to my work, to where I'm coming from, and then we'll look at some of my photographs and we'll be discussing some of my images. As usual, what I would like you to do is to participate as much as you can through live chat. That would be absolutely brilliant. So, if you'd like to actually tell me where you're from at the moment, where you're watching me from, that would be great. We have people all over the world. So from just down the road to west coast of the US to various European countries. So yeah, please tell us where you're coming from. What I'm going to do is during the course of my talk, I will be introducing your questions and comments into part of this conversation. So I would like to include them in. So please feel free to comment or to ask any questions you like. Trust me, in many years of education, I know that everybody, but absolutely everybody, has something to offer, is bringing something to the table. So let's draw from the well. Ingrid, excellent, watching from dark Sweden, indeed. Welcome, Ingrid. Thank you for being here. Excellent stuff. Anybody else, folks? Just please tell me where you're from. That would be great to actually know. Thank you. And also, if you feel that you would like to comment or discuss amongst yourselves, because you'll be actually having access to the comments, either on YouTube or on Facebook, do feel free to interact amongst yourselves. That's absolutely fine, because that is part of the experience. The more you put in, the more you will get out. And please don't feel awkward if, asking questions is absolutely fine. That's what you're here for. Not just to be a passive participant, but also to engage, to participate. So that's absolutely fine. Cool. Just a couple of announcements. As the studio is growing, gradually enlarging, every month we'll grow a little bit more. We'll start with having other exhibitions as well, possibly some other Dartmoor photographers. We're thinking into that at the moment. We're contacting people. We're already planning for the next exhibition that will be sometime in December, with a series of talks and live in conversation interviews where you'll be able to meet the artist, meet the photographer. Chris Bunny, hi from Plymouth. Hi there, just down the road over the river. I can almost wave. Thank you for being here, Chris. That's great. Excellent. So yes, we're expanding provision. So if you'd like to exhibit work, if you know friends that would like to exhibit work, by all means, give them my contact details. You have my email address there, studio@harryfricker.uk. Also, for those of you that aren't able to log into YouTube in order to access chat, if you access Facebook, you have to log in and you will have access to chat by default. But on YouTube, you can actually view on YouTube without logging in, but that leaves you, excludes you from the possibility of chat. So for those of you that are watching on YouTube and haven't got access to chat, you can send your questions by email. So that's the way around the system. So by all means, send your questions by email and they'll pop up on my screen and that will be absolutely fine. So yes, by all means, ask questions, and if you have comments, questions, send them through. If you want to engage amongst yourselves also, that's absolutely fine. Okay, without further ado, let's make a start. I call my project on the website Best Idea Ever, and that's referring to Dartmoor National Park. It's the 70th anniversary, 1951-2021. And as a matter of fact, the 70th anniversary, folks, is Today, the 30th of October 1951 is when Dartmoor was actually founded. The history is rather interesting because it was primarily through, it's an idea that, 20th century idea that in a way responded to public demand. Public demand to actually have access, free access to roam the land, which in most cases is private. So Dartmoor was created with other national parks in the UK as a means of providing free access to the land. It's a rather interesting case, actually. But I won't go into a great deal of detail here. But by all means, if you can read more about it, do so. Now, what I would like you to do is, when overall, the theme for tonight will be our relationship to the land. And when I say that, our relationship to the land, what comes to your mind? What comes to your mind when I say our relationship to the land? Send in your comments. Write 1 or 2 or 3 ideas. That's absolutely fine as we go along, and I'll retake them. I'll weave them into our conversation as we go along, because this is part of the thing, that our relationship to the land is a rather complex thing. It goes back for millennia. And it's not something that is static. It changes according to times, according to culture, according to different values that we may have at the time. But I'd like you I'd like to know what you think about that idea of our relationship to the land. It's a rather key issue in effect. Moving on, I'll just switch off this camera here. Give me a second. There. I'll be looking at 2 things. One, my photography, my background in photography, and 2, Dartmoor, the personal things with which I deal with. And as I said, by all means, feel free to pop in questions as we move along. I think that I'll put that camera back on so then I don't disappear altogether. Just a second. There. I'll pop myself there. Great. Bit of background to my photography. I studied social documentary photography, and I freelanced throughout whilst I was a student. I freelanced for The Guardian, Victoria and Albert Museum, Time Out. I lived in London at the time. It was a beehive of activity, lots of political activity, lots of demos, lots of things going on, as always. And I started freelancing. I started my photojournalism career on my own before I even finished. And this is how things started. And then I studied social documentary photography, and that gave me a kind of particular slant, a particular bias to my approach in photography, which still exists today. I'll make reference to that as we go along. Then I went on to having an academic career. That was during my MA in Image and Communication that I completed at Goldsmiths. That was absolutely great because I totally managed to self-indulge for a whole year in subjects that were my absolute passion. And I looked at photography naturally and the digital image. Bear in mind that digital photography was still new. It was still coming up there, so it was something that was very fresh. Just got a comment here. Dragana, hello, just testing if this is working. Yes, it's working absolutely fine. Thank you. Welcome here. Within my practice, or within my photographic practice, I've always created the relationship between photographic practice, the technical side of photography, and theory, and I've always spanned both. I've never seen one separate from the other. I very much see photography as a means of communication. It's probably in my view, probably the the most elegant means of communication. It's about visual communication and how we communicate within a society that is in a way driven by visual culture. The photograph has become ubiquitous. It's everywhere, literally. And within my practice, I've been influenced by photographers, and I'm just mentioning a few, right? This is just a drop in the ocean. This list is not exhaustive, but I mentioned Eugene Auger, the French photographer, turn of the century Paris, Faye Godwin, British landscape photographer. She's superb, underrated. Sadly, very few people know of her work, but she's excellent. Again, way ahead of her time in terms of looking at the landscape and in a way making references to its history and to ownership, which is a key thing. Another photographer, Paul Trevor, British documentary photographer. He was very influential in my career in making. Another great photographer whose work is extremely relevant. Hopefully I'll be able to invite him in the not too distant future. And another contemporary photographer, Melanie French. She does landscape photography. And again, she's very passionate about the environment and about topical issues. And again, they're quite influential. In terms of theory, I'm influenced by authors like Walter Benjamin, Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault, Jean Baudrillard and Susan Sontag. I'm not going to go into them because we'll be here all night, but check those names out. In terms of photographic theory, in terms of ideas, I would say if you want to make a stab at photographic theory, start with Roland Barthes, his book Mythologies, where he actually makes a lot of reference to photography. His other book is Camera Obscura. That was his last book, as a matter of fact. And then the other one I would thoroughly recommend is Susan Sontag on photography. Again, very thought-provoking essays. Cool. Excellent. Dragana says, great. Yes, you're on. It's working. Great stuff. Good to have you here, Dragana. Moving on. Given my kind of background to photography, for me the photograph always has to have a story. I don't shoot photographs for the sake of making photographs, right? It's just not me. Others might do that, I don't. To me, there's always a story behind the photograph, even if I don't necessarily mention it in the actual text. I often put the background in my Instagram. And you'll get an idea. But you'll see as this discussion progresses, you'll actually see what I refer to. There's always a story behind a photograph. In terms of some of the subjects that interest me is the dichotomy nature-culture, how one is woven into the other. And I'm really interested in this subject and have been for a very, very long time. I'm intrigued by it. I'm curious about the relationship that we actually have with nature culture and how we relate to one and the other and actually intersperse both. I won't go into details about that now, but I'll make reference to it during my when I show you my photographs. Other subjects that interest me, naturally, the landscape. The landscape is fundamental, not just in terms of photography or art, because it has a huge role within the history of art, within landscape painting. You get from French oil painting, Renaissance painters, the Age of Enlightenment. They're the ones that start looking at the landscape in painting, and from there it's very much part of our culture. If you look at the Orient, Japanese, China, you see the dealing with the landscape since long before the West. The work of Hokusai comes to mind. Check them out because it's fascinating how they represented the landscape. Other subjects that interest me are the environment, or also together with environmental issues. and consumer culture, consumer society. I'm fascinated by our relationship with consumer society. And I think one other item that I would add to that list is issues of health and well-being. And the landscape plays a huge role, particularly nowadays, in issues of health and well-being. In terms of the photographs that are on the show, that are on the exhibition, and the photographs I'll be making reference this evening, you'll be looking at my portfolio of diorama days, my business, landscape photography workshops and holidays. So I've got a very particular agenda on the way that I'm actually shooting, what I'm actually communicating. It's not just a romantic, beautiful landscape. Although the aesthetics of the image do come into it, do play a role, it's not just that, it's more than that. And again, we'll unravel those as we go along. I think two things come to mind, and they're really important. One, the largest and wildest area of open country in the south of England. Now, this is a fact, right? It is the largest and wildest areas of open country. So a lot of my photographs respond precisely to that, right? That is one of the main themes. I would say that just about every photograph refers to that. And the other thing the other theme that my images, or most of my images, respond to is it has been Dartmoor. It has been continuously inhabited since the Mesolithic. 10,000 BC. Now, in a nutshell, the Mesolithic is the time of hunter-gatherers before agriculture was introduced in the Neolithic, the New Stone Age. The Mesolithic they're still using stone tools, but communities then are hunter-gatherers. They're not sedentary, but they're nomadic. And Dartmoor has been continuously inhabited since that time, which is kind of quite mind-blowing in my way. So in my view, because we often think of Dartmoor as a kind of wilderness, myself included. When I first arrived to this neck of the wood, I was absolutely fascinated by this landscape, this wide open landscape, which seems wild, but as a matter of fact is not. It's not necessarily manicured, but it's actually quite managed, or gently managed. What we're looking at here is the valley of the River Dart, place down in the valley called Dartmeet, where the East and West Dart rivers meet, forming the River Dart, which then which starts in Dartmoor and then flows through Dartmoor and finishes in Dartmouth, right? So what in effect starts off as a stream, as a trickle of water, ends up being a huge river, right? Enormous river in Dartmouth, which is a port city. It's got its fishing fleet, and it's a wonderful city or town on the coast. Well, that starts here. The name Dart comes from the Brythonic, ancient Celtic language which means the river or place where oaks grow. The river or place where oaks grow, which is a rather poetic name for a place. As often Celtic languages actually make use of the poetic. And in the foreground, the thorn bush, obviously the tree that is associated, right, with the thorns of Christ, but also within pagan culture, goes back again millennia in terms of having qualities that are associated with culture, with the magical and the mystical. Believe it or not, in pagan culture, the thorn bush is the place where you have the doorway to the fairies, the pixies, the famous pixies that inhabit this part of the world, the southwest of England. it's a kind of a magical element. So going back to the idea of, there's always a story. Yes, there's beauty in the image in terms of the tones, in terms of the values, in terms of the fact that I'm using a polarizing filter in order to highlight the difference between the sky, to make the skies darker, the clouds whiter, to get rid of haze as much as I can, but there's that story as well behind it. Folks, again, just a quick reminder, if you'd like to have comments, if you have comments or questions, just fire away. Don't wait until the end. Shoot while you can. Shoot first, ask a question, and anyway, Next one. Oops. Sorry about that. Skipped one there. Grimspound, Bronze Age, about 1500 BC, circular hut. And I've put hut in inverted commas because it's an architectural construct of some sort. But in a recent talk by Dartmoor archaeologists, they mentioned that some of these constructions made out of stone that have been there for millennia were actually blocked, were literally not used over a long period of time. They don't know how long, right? But they haven't been used for a very long period of time. There's as if nothing's been there. They weren't dwellings, not necessarily all the time. Which is kind of intriguing because then one wonders, well, why would they go to building something that is so over the top, that would actually last over millennia, but not really use it? Did it have some sort of symbolic function? Well, we don't know. We'll probably never know because it's lost in time, lost in history. There were other dwellings in Grimspound, which is a Bronze Age compound. You can actually see the wall perimeter, right, on the edge there. Right, it's quite large. There are 24 of these stone constructions, and also in between them there is evidence of the actual stone, wooden huts, the wooden poles that were actually used to build the wooden hut. Now those were used as dwellings, but apparently some of these stone dwellings or stone constructions, although built as huts, they weren't used for dwellings, so nobody lived there apparently. And I think this is what gives Dartmoor kind of its legendary, mythological character. There's a lot of questions being asked and we don't really know the function. What purpose did they actually serve is a bit of a mystery, is a bit of an intrigue. But I think that's the beauty of Dartmoor as a place of myth and legend. Here you also have an example of the land that is actually intervened by human action, right? In this case, again, thousands of years, over millennia, and it's still there. In the background, where the valley is, you can see the line of trees. There's a modern day farm back there, but you can just see the trees, and you can just manage to see the top of the chimney there. Moving on. View from Worcester Hill Fort, an Iron Age fort, about 800 BC. Here I'm standing on one of the rampart walls. There were a number of concentrical earthworks, ramparts, probably with a wooden palisade on top. So it was a defensive position high up in the valley, overlooking fantastic areas of Dartmoor. And here you see the lattice of the landscape. This isn't a wild landscape, but it's a landscape that's tended, that's cultivated. And I think this is where we begin to actually see the confluence. It's very difficult to disentangle nature and culture. Are we looking at nature, or are we looking at culture, or are we looking at a bit of both, or are we looking at a managed nature? Depends on your interpretation. But ultimately, this photograph, this landscape photograph, is about that relationship between between nature, culture, but also comes into play the notion of ownership of the land as a means of production as well as other things. Moving on, this is shot on just on the edge of Burrito. This is during one of my workshops, actually. Most of my photographs are planned, heavily planned. I'll do my research on the place well beforehand. Sometimes I will read media articles, if there's any media articles, if there's any archaeology or written on the place, or if there's any kind of historical or mythological legendary writings on it, what's the story behind it. And I'll also plan my shoot according to the weather, so I'll check weather maps, forecasts and so on and so forth, and then go to the location. Well, this one isn't. I was just it was actually just caught on the go, so to speak. I saw the opportunity, clambered up one of the walls and actually shot it. Now, the interesting thing is that this ancient track is really an ancient track, and it possibly from the early Middle Ages or even earlier. It could go back to the Bronze Age, because it's during the Bronze Age that Dartmoor becomes to actually be partitioned and begins to be owned by different communities, different tribal groups. And it's rather interesting that this is a kind of remnant of the past, still used today. But it's no longer a trading route, a route for access. It's actually transformed now in a place of leisure, where people primarily from the larger cities and villages and towns nearby will actually go and spend leisure time enjoying the countryside. So there you actually have a change, a transformation of its use, no longer as a thoroughfare for livestock and animals and carrying crops, but it's become something else with time. This is a view of Burrito, the reservoir. It seems like a lake. It's quite big. I think it's the largest reservoir in Dartmoor. And the view is from Leathertor, where you can see the granite boulders on the lower right, and on the left in the middle ground you actually see sheep store, and towards the horizon you can probably just make out the buildings of Plymouth in the background. Burrito Reservoir was built in the 1800s as a way as a means of providing water to the growing city of Plymouth. It took a few years to build. What is kind of quite remarkable is that the River Meavy, they've dammed the River Meavy, which is it's a trickle of water. It's not that big. They dammed a couple of other rivers as well, which flooded the valley. And it's quite extraordinary, because if you go to the other side of the valley, the other side of the actual reservoir, you see how deep the valley actually is, and it loses that sort of perspective. So here you have another example of human intervention in the landscape, not done millennia ago, but a very recent one, done in the latter part of the 19th century. The forests that you see around in the area, mainly pine, but some remnants of ancient forest. Again, are a product of human activity, human cultivation of the land. It's about productivity. Okay, back to the original question. How do you feel about what do you have any comments about our relationship to the land? What does that mean? Might that signify? What is your opinion? What is your take on that? I'm intrigued. Tell me. It would be good to know. The question of our relationship to the land comes from a comment that one of my followers on Instagram actually put forward, because she's doing her MA, and she said, I'm fascinated by our relationship on the land. That's my theme. And I said, wow, well, yes, that's an important question. What is our relationship to the land? So I thought it would be a good idea to integrate it into our session this evening, as it is a very important issue, actually. Ingrid says, I like to think that we have a relationship with the land. Indeed, yes, we do. And maybe it would be interesting to thrash out, or to actually indicate a couple of points. Well, like what? Could you give some examples? Again, there's no right, there's no wrong. You're not being tested, you're not being marked. What I'm interested is in different divergent points of view that actually make that rather interesting. Because let me tell you just a little story while you think a bit about that question. Access to public land in the UK is less than 10%, possibly 8% of land in the UK has public access. The rest is privately owned. So Dartmoor and the other national parks as such are almost an anomaly. They break the rule, because you can't just go wandering on private land however much you would like to. So that marks one of our principles, of our relationship with the land, private ownership. But that wasn't the case all the time. Certainly if you go back in history, that is not the case. The land is actually viewed with a different perspective. There's something else going on. It's a different viewpoint. So, yeah. Chris. The ability to strip things back to basic and remove external distractions, to allow yourself to be absorbed by nature. Indeed, absolutely. Yes, definitely. And I think that's again, it's a very modern way of viewing the landscape. I'll put that back up. It's a very modern way of viewing the landscape. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that comment, Chris. Ingrid. We have public access in all of Sweden, meaning one can walk anywhere, even on private property, as long as you do not disturb the owners. It also means we can pick berries, etc. See, this is an interesting thing. Thank you, Ingrid. I'll put that back up again. See, this is a different view of the landscape. It's not homogeneous. It's not the same everywhere. It's on the contrary, it's something that is heterogeneous. Depends where you look at. In time, in history, and place, different laws apply. And it's interesting that public access in Sweden is all over. And Ingrid adds, yes, I agree with Chris. Yeah, quite. Thank you. Can one pick things in Dartmoor? Yes, foraging. It's a big thing, although you cannot do it commercially. If you do it commercially with a group of pickers or a large rucksack or a truck or something, then you're breaking the law. But you can actually forage for yourself. So there's all sorts of things that you can forage for yourself. Things like mushrooms, things like berries. Things like all sorts of different things that in effect that are edible, and that is a growing trend. There's a lot of interest in foraging, it's a growing thing. So yes, you can. Dragana. Is the relationship with nature, with the basic instinct of existence, Pachamama, Mother Earth, the protector and provider, we feel it consciously or otherwise? Yes, again, Dragana, thank you for that comment. That's an interesting point. In a way, this is, I'll pull that comment up again. In a way, this is a perspective, a point of view that is about a spiritual side of the landscape. Certainly you can see it within pagan cultures or neo-pagan belief systems nowadays, that in a way have revived. It's an ancestral revival, because if you go to, for example, North American Indians never saw the land as their property. They just had it. And South America, it's the same. It's a communal thing, and it belongs to everybody. It doesn't belong to one person. And there was a greater spiritual relationship with the land, with the Creator. And I think you still see that, and you also see that in Neolithic or prehistoric practice here, with the idea of belonging to the land, ancestry. I'm always amazed at finding people, and it's happened a lot to me in Dartmoor, in Bodmin Moor, and as well as the west of Cornwall, where people have lived there, sometimes in the same area for generations, going back to 500 years. And I'm absolutely fascinated by that relationship with the landscape. They truly belong. I know a photographer in Padstow who can actually trace her ancestry back to 500 years. Not many people can do that. I come from a very mixed bag. My heritage is mixed. It's people have been on the move for that same amount of time. And throughout, so it's interesting that I don't have that kind of same relationship with the land of being, in the same place for 500 years. Mine is a very different experience. Probably that's why I'm rather fascinated with people that can actually identify that relationship with the land. So yeah, that's cool. Excellent. Any other questions, folks? Do feel free to ask. It's absolutely fine. What I might do is do a slight change of tempo here and show you a bit of my raw files, how I actually shoot. I hadn't planned to actually show you this, but I think I will. So give me a second and feel free to ask any questions or put any comments while I'm actually doing this. It'll take me a little while to set up. I hadn't actually planned on doing this, but I'll share this perspective with you. Okay. What I'm going to do is do a screen share. I'm going to do a screen share here, and I'm going to show you my contact sheet. Right, and this is one of the last shots. I hope you can see that. Yes, you should be able to see that reasonably okay. Here I'm shooting on the side of Dartmoor. This is an area that I'm exploring, that I'm becoming acquainted with. And this was just a test shoot. The weather was good, I had planned there, and this was just a recce. And the way that I actually shoot is I shoot in series. It's called what in the jargon of the business is called exploring your subject matter. And this is exactly what I'm doing, just testing the water, seeing what happens. Once I actually find, as you see in this, the top row there, the next row, up to the tree, up to there, that's for 12 shots, right, where I'm actually looking at the landscape. I'm bracketing my exposures, right, I'm doing slight adjustments to the framing, right, and I'll just open one image so that then you can see the image there. I'll blow it up a bit so that you can see a bit more details. Now, the photograph of this is Burrito. The earlier photograph I was showing you is of Leathertor, and I'm approximately, you see where that TV mast is, it's just beyond that rocky outcrop, that is Leathertor. And here you can see what seems to be the arches of a bridge. Sadly you can't see my mouse, I don't think you can see my mouse, but you can see the arches of a bridge, and that is the actual dam, right? And behind that is the reservoir. And in front of it, what we're looking at is the actual valley of the River Meavy, with that ancient woodland, mainly mainly oak, but elder, elm, and so on and so forth. But that is natural woodland, and the cultivated fields there, the pasture lands. But just to give you an idea of the shot, what I do is I don't take one photograph, but I actually take series of photographs, where I'll actually bracket and make slight adjustments, not only to the exposure, but also to the framing and the composition, just to get a feel of it, right? That's a similar image, but with a slightly different exposure. I shoot in RAW, which then I process, I manipulate, and the kind of manipulations that I do are very, very low. They tend to actually be just adjustments of tone, of contrast, and of color. Here I saw the possibility of the tree. The tree interested me, but it wasn't quite it. Again, another hawthorn, and there's the church there, the tree, the cultivated fields, but it's not quite there. I felt it's too much foreground. It's not as clear, not as crisp as I would have liked it to actually be, so that one doesn't actually make the mark. There's a question. Dragana. And the question says, I've blocked it. Nomadic life does not exclude the existential relationship with the land. Absolutely, yes, possibly even more so. The idea of a nomadic life, as fragile as it may be, as uncertain as it may be, probably means that you actually have more of an existential relationship with the land than we have, which is rather interesting, actually. Let me go back to, thank you for that. Let me go back to this, and what I'm showing you here is just a quick insight into the images, how I actually shoot. I shoot in series. On this part here, I'm actually exploring, this is the River Meavy. This is what actually, the small river I was telling you, that actually feeds the reservoir. You can see that it's actually quite small, with a small bridge spanning it. But this is the river. This kind of tunnel is about 8 to 10 foot wide, over an old Victorian bridge. And I was just testing the light, looking at the relationship between light and shadow, and just doing some test shots with the idea of going back at some stage. This is just to give you some idea of behind. I'll close this now. This is just a way of showing you a bit of how I actually shoot. That in a way it's not kind of haphazardly, but it's actually quite planned and quite deliberate in the way that I go out and look for photographs, and that is how I build my portfolio of images. Dragana, another question or comment. This was an old one related to the previous conversation. Yes, absolutely, definitely. We gathered that. Yes, this is what I deviated, and then I brought it up as part of the conversation. I didn't want it left out because it was an important comment. So yes, thank you for that. Cool. And this brings today's presentation to an end. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. By all means, feel free to send any, if you have any comments, post this presentation. But feel free to send them by email, or if you have any queries, by all means, feel free to contact me. Remember that next week is Nikki Thompson's presentation. She'll be in conversation. She's an artist photographer based in Dartmoor. Her work is very thought-provoking. She shoots using a wet collodion, which is a Victorian process that literally involves using a large field camera, using glass plate negatives, sloshing them with light sensitive material, exposing the wet chemicals to light, and then developing the image that way. So it's a process that disappeared circa 1870s. It became obsolete. And in a way, she's revived it, and her photography is absolutely excellent. So don't forget to actually book that in conversation, which is very promising. And so thank you for being here tonight. Thank you so much for your comments and your questions. That's been absolutely great. I hope you've enjoyed this evening, and see you next time. Have a great evening. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much. Bye for now. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful. Thanks, Harry. Thank you, Dragana. Thank you so much for your comments and your participation. I hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you all, folks, next time, next week, Saturday, 8 p.m.